Hello, I'm your host, Ron Lowe. For the next half hour, the Pinellas Park Historical Society is going to share with you, through a remarkable photo history and live interviews with people who were there 3/4 of a century ago, the remarkable story of a Florida boomtown. You may be surprised to learn who the pioneer settlers of Pinellas Park were and what brought them to the beautiful but rugged land where now stands a thriving progressive city of 42,000 souls. What was the lure that compelled established men to abandon the comfort and convenience of big cities 1,000 miles to the north and bring their families to a community that only existed on paper? The story of the birth and early development of Pinellas Park is as fascinating as any you've ever heard. A true life American pioneer saga. And we'll be back to share it with you right after the history news with Charlie Jones.
Thank you, Ron, and hello to everyone viewing this program. We're glad to bring to you history in the news. For our journey into the past, let us go to an unincorporated community in the northern part of Pinellas County on the Gulf of Mexico called Ozona, Florida.
Thank you, Charlie Jones. The man generally recognized as the developer of Pinellas Park, one Franklin A. Davis, was a publisher of health and medical books in Philadelphia. F.A. Davis, as he preferred to be called, came to the tiny Florida village of Tarpon Springs in 1894 for his own fragile health and found that he did in fact feel better in the subtropical climate. He and Philadelphia industrialist Jacob Diston met in Tarpon Springs and decided to go into partnership providing the new wonder of the age, electricity, to that community. But the people of Tarpon Springs didn't want electricity, preferring their kerosene lamps and gas lights. The venture failed. Undaunted, F.A. Davis convinced the St. Petersburg City Council in 1897 to contract with him for electric utility service. In the process, he founded St. Petersburg Light and Power, a forerunner of Florida Power. With ventures into supplying drinking water and telephone service, he became Pinellas County's utilities baron. But in 1907, there was a major bank panic, and Davis, who in the manner of that day was long on paper ownership but short on cash, lost everything. When his Tarpon Springs Electric Company had failed, Davis energetically pressed on and built a modest utilities empire in St. Petersburg. Now, through no failure of his own, that was gone too. Many a lesser man might have retreated to the safety of Philadelphia and the familiarity of the publishing business, but Frank Davis was the essence of the early 20th century entrepreneur. His unwavering faith in the American dream kept him in the hunt. Though he had never been involved in a real estate venture before, in 1908 he contracted with his old friend Jacob Diston to purchase, on option, 21 square miles of land located 7 miles northwest of St. Petersburg. He returned north to set up a land promotion and sales operation. In 1909, F.A. Davis incorporated a land development association in Delaware. He sent a young Philadelphia contractor, Patrick J. McDivitt, to survey the property for a town and subdivide the surrounding land into 5 and 10-acre farm sites. The development was to be called Pinellas Farms and the town to be known as Pinellas Park. Davis contracted with several northern real estate firms to help sell the property and backed the effort with an extensive and slick advertising campaign in northern markets. Big posters extolled the virtues of Pinellas Park's climate and soil, promising huge profits to farmers. The opportunity offered in this promised paradise: buy a 10-acre farm for $250 and receive a lot in the town of Pinellas Park free. Davis's organization sent work crews ahead by train to begin preparation of the site. What was called Pinellas Park in the advertisements did not exist when these work crews arrived. So they had to first throw their baggage from the train and then jump into adjoining ditches, all while the train rolled on to its next stop, St. Petersburg. Huge stands of virgin pine, hundreds of acres, had to be cleared for 3 model farms which were to demonstrate the fertility of the soil. 2 large rectangular buildings called colony houses were built to accommodate the earliest settlers until their homes could be built. When the colony houses were finished, the first settlers of what was to become Pinellas Park left behind the city of Pittsburgh. and like their parents and grandparents before them, became pioneers. This article from a Pittsburgh paper dated Friday, September 16th, 1910, shows this adventurous group setting out for the wilderness of undeveloped Florida. 3 days later, they arrived at Pinellas Park. Knowing that manufactured goods would not be available in their new home, the settlers had sent 7 boxcars full of personal belongings, furniture, tools, clothing, enough food to last until the first season's crops could come in, and 9 pianos. The colony houses were comfortable, the weather beautiful, and the spirit of starting over and building a new community was in the air. Postcards and letters north to families and friends brought still more new settlers. Though some settlers came all the way by train, many boarded boats in Baltimore, which took them as far as Jacksonville. This is a group of settlers in 1911 on their way south. From Jacksonville, they traveled by rail to Pinellas Park, which was now a flag stop on the railroad. Sales of farm sites went so well that the colony houses were soon overtaxed, and later arrivals found themselves living in tent cities until their homes could be finished. Mosquitoes and soggy bedrolls made the experience one to remember. Not everybody was thrilled with the idea of building a community in the wilderness. Some newcomers, arriving at night, took one look at the primitive conditions and refused to get off the train. Some never returned. Those who stayed faced the huge task of carving from the thickly wooded land an entire community. Not just houses and roads, but everything that makes up a community. Business to meet people's needs, transportation, utilities, churches, a school, and a social life. These pioneers took up the challenge with enthusiasm. What they did and the speed with which they did it is an amazing story. Houses were built with lumber from a sawmill set up by the developers. Some were large, comfortable homes built in the northern style. Others more basic, sprung up on the surrounding farms. Park Boulevard, then and now the town's main artery, was cut through the pines, and homesteads appeared along its sides. By December of 1910, 3 months after the arrival of the first settlers, a one-room schoolhouse had been built. The next month, classes began with Miss Nell Byers teaching a class of 25 students. Doc Vogel became postmaster for the infant town, and D.D. Stein, southern manager for the Tyrone Pinellas Company, had begun supervising the construction of an enormous sugarcane mill alongside the railroad track. It was designed to be the hub of a vast, sprawling sugarcane empire. More about that later. Unlike many Florida land developers, F.A. Davis, P.J. McDivitt, and D.D. Stein believed in what they claimed in their advertisements. They moved their families down from the north to join the pioneer effort, and they kept their promises to the settlers. Roads were cleared. Model farms were set up, not just for sales promotion, but to help the newcomers adjust to Florida's conditions and climate. Here, F.A. Davis proudly shows off some products of the model farms. That commitment to the community and the civic-mindedness of those early pioneers set a standard of community pride that still characterizes Pinellas Park after 3/4 of a century. Why, in no time, the schoolhouse had been joined by a Methodist church, and then a Presbyterian church, and then the first Catholic church in all of Pinellas County, Sacred Heart. Colonel O.N. Byers opened a well-stocked general store, which doubled as the town post office. Now the townspeople of Pinellas Park could buy most of their needs locally. A fine hotel, the Royal Palm, owned by H.M. Reese, opened its doors. Its dining room, with a gracious atmosphere and home-cooked meals, quickly gained wide approval. It was no small satisfaction to the proud Pinellas Parkers that connoisseurs from St. Petersburg regularly came by train to enjoy the Royal Palm's dining room. For the moment, let's turn our attention to the man regarded as the civic soul of early Pinellas Park, Patrick J. McDivitt. Young McDivitt had been one of the first on the scene as a surveyor, and he held the title of secretary of the development company. In fact, he quickly became general manager of the entire project. He is shown here at the gateway to Model Farm Number 1, with a newly completed sugarcane syrup mill in the background. Beside him is his young daughter, Marie McDivitt. You're the little girl in the picture, aren't you? Marie McDivitt.
Yes, I am.
Well, you've traveled a long way across a lot of decades to be with us here right now, sharing your stories of early Pinellas Park, and we thank you so much for coming and joining us here. Tell us something about your father, P.J. McDivitt. What was he like?
Well, of course, I would be very prejudiced. I thought he was wonderful. Most people were pretty much thought that also. I think he was a very kind man. And I remember one thing. He always put a $5 bill in his pocket in case, as he went through the woods that day, he'd find somebody much worse off than the average, and he could help them along the way.
You know, I've heard that he really believed with all his heart in this town of Pinellas Park.
Well, he certainly did. And when it got so that some of the children, myself included, and my brothers, were ready for high school, he had changed his profession, and he was going to be in St. Petersburg. He was a building inspector. He went to work every day, and he took whoever needed to go to high school. The old car he had was open as those, and he would take whoever wanted to go. It wasn't a taxi, it wasn't anything. It was just a means of getting to the school.
Tell me something, as you look back across the years, things have changed a lot. In your mind, as you think about the community of Pinellas Park when you were a young girl, what made it special?
I think the way everybody tried to help everybody else. And anybody had trouble, even if you weren't very crazy about them, when they had any problems, everybody pitched in and did what needed to be done. And when you had a community entertainment, everybody got together and had that.
Tell me something. What did people do with their kids, their children, when they were going to go to some activity in town?
Well, people played a lot of cards, and they did a lot of dancing in the old clubhouse. And around the edge where the benches were, where the people would lay their children there, and they'd go to sleep, and they stayed there. Because, of course, in that day, nobody had babysitters or that type of things. We weren't in this part of the South that had maids and aides. So they brought their children and put them on the benches, and and there was a corner in the dance hall, and the children played there until they got tired and went to sleep.
As you look at the community of Pinellas Park now, with all the changes, do you see anything about it that you would say is still the same?
Oh, I think it's pretty much it all wants everything to be good, and everybody wants to pull together, which is true in that area, from my observation, more than in many sections of the country.
Well, we'd like to thank you so much for being with us for this program about the history of Pinellas Park. Marie McDivitt Swagger, we thank you so very much.
Thank you.
When we come back, we're going to have another guest who was there in those early days, and he did it all. He pitched for the town baseball team. At just 24 years old, he was a town commissioner, and he served the town as mayor in the 1950s. His honor, Kermit Hoffman. We'll be right back.
Hello. I was just reading the Clearwater News. Clearwater's certainly looking forward now that she's won her place as the county seat of the brand new Pinellas County. Here's a full-page ad extolling her attractions. It says in part, a city of 1,500 inhabitants, modern sewerage system. Actually, we've had the sewerage system 2 years now. Paved streets, concrete sidewalks, and all those things which make up a modern, progressive city, with the climate thrown in as a bonus. There's an editorial, too, about endorsing brick paving for Cleveland Street. The editor hopes that the council will push that issue through, and so do I. Are you wondering which newspaper I'm reading? It's the Clearwater News, dated January 4th, 1912. Pinellas County was just 4 days old. I'm Mabel Wilcox, volunteer docent at Heritage Park.
The new settlement of Pinellas Park from the beginning was a beehive of activity. In addition to the 3 model farms, roads were quickly completed with the use of heavy machinery. Necessary drainage was provided by a network of broad ditches. The town obtained a shiny red 2-wheeled fire engine pulled by horses. It was quartered in the new fire station located next to the equally new town hall. Pinellas Park sank its own deep well and built a water tower. The settlers built their own electrical generating system, a 1-cylinder engine that provided service from dusk till midnight. Few had cars in 1912, so the Pinellas Park bus line was formed. A ride into St. Petersburg on the jitney cost 10 cents. Starting from scratch in 1910, these people created a community with a level of public utilities and services that many a longer established community might envy. One returning visitor wrote to a northern friend, "It is the most astonishing thing. Where 2 years ago there was nothing but piney woods for miles in all directions, there now stands a thriving town." The first town council meeting was held October 14th, 1914, and P.J. McDivitt was elected mayor. The town prospered. In 1915, a new 4-room brick schoolhouse opened. Attending that school were our guests, Marie McDivitt, and this man, Kermit Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman, welcome to the program, and thank you so much for coming. I'd like to ask you about when it was you came to Pinellas Park and who you came with.
Well, in 1909, my father came down with the early settlers, a railroad group, and he was advised, my mother had tuberculosis, he was advised to get her to Florida. And he came down in 1910 with 2 horses. I had 2 sisters and 3 brothers. There was 5 of us children. And in 1911, Mom died, and she's buried in Sunnyside Cemetery on 54th Avenue. And that's the early part.
Your father was E.E. Hoffman.
E.E. Hoffman, yes, sir.
And I believe he built the first house.
Well, that's the article that one of the old-timers brought to our 50th anniversary celebration in Pinellas Park. He had a little thing like the Grit, the St. Petersburg Times was that type of paper, and it said, headline said, E.E. Hoffman builds first residence in Pinellas Park. And it was a 2-story house in the east end of that, where the 19 comes at the end of Park Boulevard, in that area. He bought 40 acres.
You know, I think it's hard for people to understand what a really rough and ready place rural Florida was back then. You tell most people about alligators, and they'll jump back real quick. But you tell some stories about the young men of Pinellas Park in those early days and alligators that I bet you they'd be interested in.
Yes, I could tell a few alligator stories.
You guys went out and hunted alligators for recreation?
Well, when we were, I don't know just exactly how to express this, but when we were in the teenage, there was nothing for us to do.
Teenagers today complain about the same thing.
Well, that was one, I don't remember who got it started, but if I couldn't get a car, this was in later years, one of the other boys could, and that was our generally Saturday or Sunday recreation. We had an alligator pole, and we'd find where their holes were, their den, and they always had a den back and a channel going to it. We'd stick the pole in there and find out where he was, and then we'd dig down maybe 15, 20 feet back till we found out where it was and pull him out of there.
You know, you made a comment when we spoke earlier. You said that there wasn't a mean person in the park. Will you tell me what you mean by that?
Well, I didn't know any, and everybody, it's like Marie said, that if you were putting a roof on a house, you'd have a lot of volunteers to come and help you. I mean, that explains my feeling about it. Now we have neighbors been in there for 5 years, and we don't even know their names. So the feeling today is not what it was years ago.
Well, I know that you have a feeling for the community of Pinellas Park. You came to Pinellas Park when you were 1.5 years old. You grew up in the town. You went to school there. You were a pitcher on the town baseball team. From what I hear, you were a pretty good one.
Yeah.
You were a policeman in Pinellas Park at the age of 21. You were the youngest councilman in the history of Pinellas Park at the age of 24. And you served the city as mayor for 4 years during the 1950s.
Well, don't forget municipal judge.
I didn't know about that.
I don't look like a judge, do I?
Well, I'm not a bit surprised because you have been deeply involved in the civic life of Pinellas Park right along. And we'd like to say to you, ask you to stay with us, and say to you, thank you so very much for coming here and being with us and sharing some of this flavor and color from the old days in Pinellas Park. The dream of a great city was based to a large degree on the sugarcane industry, and expand it did. Fields of sugarcane 16 feet tall covered hundreds of acres, and a narrow gauge railroad was built to bring the harvest to the mills from farms as far away as the area in St. Petersburg, now known as Tyrone Square. A float in the shape of a boat made entirely of sugarcane represented Pinellas Park in the 1914 DeSoto Day Parade. The Pinellas Park Syrup Company was riding high, and the future looked rosy. In addition to sugarcane, area farms were producing bumper crops of vegetables and flowers for northern markets, and poultry and hog raising were profitable. On May 27th of 1915, George W. Williams, Sr. was appointed Chief of Police. The force consisted of one man, Williams himself. While commerce flourished, the townspeople also put a lot of stock in community and culture. This snappily outfitted 24-piece concert band was a source of much pride. That pride showed in other community institutions too. On Thursday, March 22nd, 1917, the school board published a ranking of all schools in Pinellas County in attendance. There, at the top of the list, was Pinellas Park. But 1917 was also the year F.A. Davis died, and his passing seemed to cast a pall over the fortunes of the town he had helped to found. World War I brought a halt to the town's phenomenal growth, pulling many people north for good-paying jobs in war production plants. Worse, the sugarcane mill failed, and with it, the entire dream of a sugarcane empire. Some say the product was just not that good. Some say increased freight rates made the business unprofitable. But the truth may be stranger than that. It may be that the mill, like the dream, was just too big. One observer at the time remarked that if all of Pinellas County had been planted in sugarcane, it wouldn't have been sufficient to keep the mill operating at capacity. The great hurricane of 1921 demolished the abandoned mill. Discouragement led many to seek their fortunes elsewhere, and population dropped from 250 to barely 60 souls. The Florida land boom of the middle 20s breathed some life into the town for a while. By 1925, there were 3 paved streets, a town clerk, 10 firemen, and a town maintenance man. A chamber of commerce had been formed, and a more modest image offered. This 1926 brochure appeals to the family of modest means. When the short-lived boom went bust, the little town of Pinellas Park went into a deep slumber. During the Depression, people moved away and houses were abandoned. Whole streets of houses were sold and moved to the beaches. One resident recalls you could roller skate all day on sidewalks laid out along empty streets. Alarmed that the community would vanish entirely, the town council passed a law forbidding the removal of houses. Even by 1940, the census recorded only 691 residents in Pinellas Park. But the park's fortune had begun to turn again. By 1950, the U.S. Census counted 2,924 residents, a growth rate of over 500% in one decade. By 1960, the population was 11,000. For several years, James A. Shoecraft had been mayor of the town. When he retired, another pioneer, our guest Kermit Hoffman, became mayor and served for 4 years, during which time, says a history published on the town's 50th anniversary in 1965, the greatest improvement in the park's history were either started or contemplated, the most noteworthy being the 4-laning of Park Boulevard in 1957. And in 1967, while Dr. Mel Dinsmore was mayor, the community that had begun with such civic hopes reached the top rung of the municipal ladder. Pinellas Park was awarded the status of an all-American city. By 1980, the census was 32,811. Today, that figure stands at 42,000. So what is today's Pinellas Park like? It's a diverse community with a wide range of income levels and lifestyles, but in many important ways, it's very much like the pioneering community of years gone by. The colony houses and the cane mill are gone, but you can still visit the Royal Palm Hotel. Today, it's the Beaux Arts Gallery. The grand old lady is still in the Reese family, operated by Thomas Bruce Reese. You can still find plenty of McIntyres, Badgers, Brennans, and Hoffmans around, and you'll find Blair Bender on the fire department, just like his granddaddy. In Pinellas Park, the quality of life is still the community's priority, and the city continues to improve on it. In 1986, the community's crime rate was significantly down. Even with all the changes, F.A. Javis and P.J. McDivitt would approve.